Right now, on your shirt, your jacket, or your jeans, there are small objects that barely register in your mind. You've pressed them, pulled them, and fastened them thousands of times without a second thought. In 1520, the King of France, Francis I, commissioned 1,600 of them, in pure gold, for a single outfit. In 14th century England, men and women left them in their wills. Not land, not silver candlesticks, not coins, buttons, specifically, carefully, by name. You probably assume buttons have always been cheap. You assume they were always used for fastening, and you assume their value is purely practical. Every one of those assumptions is wrong. The history of the button is not a footnote. It is a story that runs from the Indus Valley to the courts of Versailles. From a single craftsman shaping a piece of shell to a legal battle that paralyzed the fashion industry of an entire city. This is object lore, where the history you never knew hides in the objects you never noticed. And the button, that small, overlooked disc on your collar right now, carries more history than most monuments. To understand how something so ordinary became so valuable, you have to go back further than you think. Not to medieval Europe, not to the Roman Empire, but to a civilization that flourished 4,000 years ago, along a river in what is now Pakistan. Around 2000 BCE, craftspeople in the Indus Valley civilization were producing small, curved objects from seashells. Archaeologists have recovered them by the hundreds across excavation sites in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, two cities that were, at their peak, among the most sophisticated urban centers on Earth. But these early buttons were not used for fastening. There were no buttonholes. They were purely decorative, sewn onto fabric as ornament, as display, as signal. For over 3,000 years, this is what the button was. Beautiful, useless for its eventual purpose. The change came in the 13th century. In the German-speaking states of Europe, tailors had begun cutting fabric in new ways, closer to the body, following its curves. But tight-fitting garments created a structural problem. How do you close something that needs to be opened again? Laces could fray, clasps could break, pins were temporary. The buttonhole was the answer. This single invention, a small slit in fabric reinforced at the edges, transformed clothing construction entirely. For the first time, a garment could be tailored tightly to the human body. Sleeves could be fitted, collars could be closed. A silhouette that had been structurally impossible was now fashionable across the continent, and the button moved from decoration to function, from ornament to architecture. By the 14th century, the button had spread across Europe, and it had become something that would be genuinely difficult to explain to anyone living today. It had become a luxury object, not because buttons were scarce in nature, shells and bone existed everywhere, but because producing a single finished button of quality required skilled labor, rare materials, and considerable time. A button in the late medieval period might be carved from ivory, cast in silver, inlaid with colored enamel, or set with semi-precious stones. A master craftsman could spend an entire workday on a single piece. The result was predictable. The number of buttons on a garment became a direct, visible statement of wealth. More buttons meant more money. It was that simple, and that legible to anyone who could see it. This is why sumptuary laws emerged. In England, France, and the German states, governments passed legal codes regulating what citizens could wear based on their social rank. These laws named buttons explicitly. A merchant could not legally wear gold buttons in public. That privilege was reserved for the nobility. The button was not a fashion accessory. It was a credential. And it is why, in 14th century England, men and women inventoried their buttons alongside their silver candlesticks and land deeds when drawing up their wills. A set of 12 silver buttons could be worth more than a working horse. Wealthy estates listed individual buttons by material, style, and count. But the full weight of what buttons meant to medieval society only becomes clear when you look at what happened next, when someone tried to take control of them entirely. In 1675, the Buttonmakers' Guild of Paris, known as the Passementiers, filed a formal legal complaint against the Tailors' Guild. The question at the center of the dispute: who had the exclusive right to manufacture buttons? The tailors argued that buttons were part of garment construction, their domain by professional right. The passementeers argued that buttons were a distinct craft product, theirs by trade tradition. Both sides retained lawyers. Both sides had powerful backers at the French court, and both sides had the attention of Louis XIV. The Sun King, a man who understood power and status display better than almost anyone who had ever lived, owned buttons worth what would today amount to millions of euros. His ceremonial coat, documented in royal court records, was decorated with diamonds set into gold button mounts along every seam and cuff. Louis was forced to intervene personally. His court issued royal edicts. Fines were levied on offenders. Workshops were raided. Craftsmen were arrested for producing buttons without the proper guild authorization. This was not a minor dispute between craftsmen. At its height, the Parisian button industry employed tens of thousands of workers. The city had over 300 registered button workshops, all of them dependent on the outcome of a legal argument about who owned the right to shape a small disc of metal. The conflict continued for decades, and it only began to resolve when the Industrial Revolution changed the terms entirely. In the 18th century, Birmingham became the button capital of the world. New pressing and stamping machines could produce thousands of identical metal buttons per day, at a fraction of the cost of a single handmade piece. Within a generation, the button became something it had never been before: affordable, common, ordinary. So the next time you button your coat on the way out the door, pause for just 1 second. That small disc of plastic costs almost nothing, but the object in your hand was once cast in silver by a craftsman who spent an entire day on a single piece. It was worn by kings as a declaration of rank. It was fought over in the courts of Paris. It was listed by name in the wills of ordinary men and women who had almost nothing else to leave behind. The button didn't become ordinary because it stopped mattering. It became ordinary because the world finally caught up to what a 13th century tailor already understood: that this small, overlooked object had changed the way human beings dress, signal status, and move through the world. And that object is on your shirt right now. If you found yourself looking at your buttons differently just now, that's what object lore is for. Like this video so that the next person who thinks buttons are boring finds out they're wrong. Share it with someone who owns more clothes than they know what to do with, because now they have something to say about all of it. And if you want to know why the fork was once considered a tool of the devil, subscribe to Object Lore. The next object is waiting. The history you never knew hides in the objects you never noticed.